Today, I'm chatting with Dr. Hazel-Grace Yates. In their 13 years as a sex and relationship coach, Hazel-Grace discovered that many couples who wanted better sex were in fact blocked by unresolved emotional hurts. The quality of their communication was the real roadblock. The skills that help the couples resolve and heal these communication gaps transform their intimacy in and out of the bedroom. Hazel-Grace's innovative, fun, and educational style of sex and intimacy coaching is born out of their deep commitment to creating a more compassionate, loving, and safe world. As an evolutionary educator, they bring a unique blend of professional know-how, curiosity, authentic communication, and personal vulnerability to their practice. I'm so excited to chat with you, Hazel-Grace. Welcome.
Yay, thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Well, you alluded to it. You've been a sex and intimacy coach for so long, and I'm sure people come to you wanting better sex, wanting deeper connection. But what's the real issue? What's really getting in the way?
Well, but we can take it back to most of our childhoods, where most of us did not have good role models or good examples of how to move conflict in a way that actually repairs and creates more connection, trust. And so that is like missing from the foundation of most of us. So then, right, those children grow up and they take the skills that they got from their childhood and apply them into their relationships. And yeah, it's the hurts, it's the misunderstandings, and those are not cleaned up, and people will, avoid them or just don't have the skills to deal with them, or it builds and there's a resentment and there's a volcano. And then people don't want to be intimate and people don't want to have sex with one another when there's all this built up hurt between one another. And so I am really, 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 really excited that I have really channeled a structure called the repair process, which is an acronym, which I'm super excited to share with you. And that structure, and the reason I'm so excited is that the acronym, the structure, really encapsulates all the communication skills that I've learned over 13 years in this really compact, succinct process that I'm just so passionate right now to share with the world.
Oh, I love that so much. Yeah, I mean, it's so true that our challenges now don't start in this moment. They start way back. And I got to be real, like I would love to avoid conflict at all costs. If we could just never have conflict and never have to have hard conversations, I would much prefer that.
Yeah, and that while there is that some part of that in me, at this point with my relationship to conflict, there's sometimes almost like an excitement because I have so much confidence and competence and trust that these ruptures, these hurts, these ouches, these missteps, that there's so much treasure on the other side of it if we can move through it. And in fact, some of my favorite friendships and relationships and colleagueships in my life started off with a really intense upset and conflict towards the beginning of their relationship. And our ability to move through it actually quickly deepened the structure of our relationship. So I guess I just want to like inspire the possibility that how we relate to conflict really like it's an underpinning of how we move through conflict. And so there's like excitement to it because I have the lived experience of the fruit of moving through it and actually creating and like a deeper sense of trust and connection. And there's an art form, a Japanese art form called kintsugi, which I liken to this. So the art form is where you take broken ceramic and then it's put back together, but it's put back together with gold lacquer. And so the concept is like it's actually more structurally integrous and more beautiful once it's been mended and healed. And so that's what's possible in relationships.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Yeah, in a relationship that there's not actual conflict resolution, it's more unstable. It's like more fragile. It's like you're putting duct tape on it and like it's more likely to probably crumble, even though it might feel maybe not better, but easier to like not go there.
Yeah, it may feel easier to not go there. And what happens when we don't go there is that stays stored, stuck in our body. And as you know, as a somatic practitioner, that stuff gets lodged in our systems and it can cause us disease. And it takes an enormous amount of energy for us to hold that stuff that we're avoiding dealing with. And it really just clouds. I like to imagine like if there was like a clear glass between us, and the clear glass is how we see one another in our relationship. And when we clean up on a regular basis the little micro hurts, then we can see one another clearly. I can be seen and I can see you clearly. And then when there's conflict or hurts, there's like little mud splatters that get on this plane of glass. And then we're not actually fully being seen or seeing the other, and there's stuff in the way. And so I feel inspired by having, relationships where we can be seen and fully see the other.
Yeah, that is such a good analogy as someone who wears glasses, and it's not until you wash them that then you're like, oh my God, these were so dirty. Like I can see so much more clearly. And that resonates as like, like I'm living now with roommates for the first time for like 3 years. And there's all these little things that sometimes I'll be like, oh gosh, they're mad at me because I left dishes in the sink. And then if I bring it up, they're like, yeah, it's actually no big deal. And I'm like, oh, it was my shit actually informing what I thought was happening. And if I hadn't brought it up, it would just have like kept building.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I love that. Thank you so much for that analogy with the glasses. That is really cool. I love that. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So let's get into the actual repair framework.
Yeah, great. There's a few things that I want to say before we kind of dive into the framework, which one of them, just some concepts that are just really good to have awareness of when going towards a repair. Repair conversation. One is that it's possible that repair is not possible, or at least not yet. And so just knowing that someone may not be ready, or they may not have the capacity, or you may not feel safe enough to move towards the repair conflict. And even though this process is a structure and it is linear, it's a process, and it's not always like exactly, so for example, you may have to like go back and pause or take time. So even though it's linear in the acronym, it can sometimes take its own path and pacing. And yeah, so those are a few things that I just want to keep. Oh, and then the other thing is, the bigger a rupture, the slower you want to go. And what I mean by that is the more intense a conflict is, that you want to create a lot of spaciousness and slowness and going slow. And I'll give some insights into how to slow down the process. It's almost like you're never going to get in trouble for going too slow in a repair process, and you're most certainly always going to get in trouble if you go too fast. Because then if you're going too fast, what happens is there's other micro hurts and other micro misunderstandings when you're going too fast, and then you've actually got more to repair. So it's actually quicker to go slower. And then the other thing is, and especially if people listen to this today and they want to try it on with practice, you want to practice on lower stakes, minor intensity, little ouches first. You want to practice like on the bunny slopes, like on skiing. You want to start on the easiest terrain, and then you get that kind of in your bones, and then you can kind of more move towards kind of the more intense kind of conflicts. So those are a few things to kind of like set the stage before diving into the repair process. Anything you want to share on anything I just said?
No, really helpful groundwork. I mean, it's like, obviously, there can be such urgency when it's a big thing in our life that we want to repair. But, it's like, if you're just learning how to drive, maybe don't go on the highway right away.
Exactly. Don't go 80 miles an hour for your first round drive out. Yeah. Totally. Yeah, great. So I like to think of the the acronym repair in 2 segments. And the first segment is REP, and that's actually the prep. So some people have been calling it PREP, like the prep. You pause, and then you resource, and then empathy, and then permission. But really, the REP, the prep, is to prepare you to have the what I call the clearing the air conversation, which AIR, clearing the air conversation. So there's the prep, and then there's the clearing the air conversation. So we'll get into the prep. So the first one, pausing is a good idea. Just like take stock. Have I eaten? Have I slept? What am I feeling? What's actually going on? And the first letter in repair is R, which stands for resourcing. And when I say resourcing, I'm referring to our nervous system. And if we could oversimplify and we could imagine that our nervous systems are either in a regulated state or a dysregulated state, those states are going to affect how we listen and how we communicate. And what I mean by that is if you're in a more dysregulated state, that means your system is going to be more fight or flight. It's going to be more in the like survival, and things are going to be moving really fast. Things are black and white. You don't have a lot of access to like empathy and choices and compassion. And the impact of that is not being able to fully hear maybe what someone is saying, but what you're hearing through your unconscious filters. So for example, one of my core wounds is I'm bad, I did it wrong. So if I'm in a dysregulated state, when I'm listening to someone, my vigilant fear survival brain is going to say, are they saying I did anything wrong? Are they saying I did anything bad? Are they saying I did anything wrong? And I'm like listening for that instead of actually listening to what they said, right? So that's like, and also being in a dysregulated state, we may not always say exactly what we mean. I'm sure some people have had the experience of having said something and then being like, oh, I didn't actually mean that, or that's not what I meant, or I regret saying that, or I didn't really want to say that, some version of that. So we can see that being in a dysregulated state is not, it's not a winning formula for an awesome resolution conversation. So what we want to do then instead is we want to resource our nervous system as much as possible to be in a more regulated state. And a more regulated state means more like we can feel our body, we can take breaths, we can feel more centered, we can feel our bodies. And then at that point, we'll have more choices. We'll have more perspectives. I can maybe even like consider like your reality versus just my reality. So that's a more regulated state. And I like to, this is one of my favorite tools that I'm going to share right now in the resourcing is it's called the charge scale. And if you can imagine a scale between 1 and 10, and 1 being like, you can feel some upset, but it's really, really minor. It feels like almost not worth mentioning. And then a 10 would be like the most intense anger, hurt, really, 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 really dysregulated. So if you want, when you're on the resourcing step with yourself, it's a good idea to name, okay, like this thing just happened. I feel like I'm at a 6 or a 7. Like that's a pretty kind of bigger kind of upset thing. What can I do to support myself so that I can potentially resource myself and come down on the charge scale so that when I even ask for the conversation, I'm actually coming from a more centered, heart space, grounded place. And how you can go from a 6 or a 7 down into a more regulated state looks like a million different things depending on the person. And if it's like a really, really intense kind of thing, you might want to do something that discharges some of the bigness. So maybe that can look like dancing or vigorous exercising or punching pillows or finding a trusted person that you can just vent and just, get it out. So that's kind of like the more bigger kind of things. And then all the way down to more of our subtler ways. And this is the somatic practices that you teach and like are on your podcast, that you can listen to any of them and get those skills, right? But they could be more like doing a body scan or noticing something that feels good in the room, or tuning into a part of your body that has you feel centered and grounded. So there's lots of different ways that someone can resource. And so that's the first step. And I'll just pause and I'll just see if you have any questions or comments about that.
Thank you. I think I'll just comment and say I have an episode on somatic resourcing. It's maybe like 4 episodes ago. I can't remember. It's called somatic resourcing. And yeah, in this podcast, we have episodes that are somatic practices, as well as if you go to YouTube, you can actually be guided in those. So yeah, there's definitely, there's no right way to do it, because it's really about like, what is the energy? Am I more activated? Am I more shut down? Where am I on that charge scale? And so it's like, tune into your body, try something, see what's shifted, try something else. And what I will say is, some issues you may not get to a 1, like that might be a tall order.
Oh, totally. Yeah. The goal is not to get to a 1. The goal is, can I do something that supports me and our relationship, that would support the possibility of this conversation being more successful? And the more that I can try to regulate or resource myself, it might increase the possibility of me being heard and me being able to communicate what I want more clearly. And then you decide however long that you've put the effort. Oh, you know what? I just remembered. I want to tell that story from the festival that I actually did the repair process. And I'll just go through the whole process, including resourcing, and people can just have a picture of what the whole process can look like. Totally. And then we'll jump back to E after I do this little bit. So this was like 8 years ago at a festival. And what's so cool is, I didn't have this model until this year, but I realized I've actually been doing the repair process for so long. I just actually now have articulation and language around it. Okay, so I was at a festival. I did not have my top on like I normally do at festivals. And it was a festival that was like welcomed and supported. And I hear this guy yell at me, "Sweet tits." And my like happy, joy, sunshine spirit just completely crumbled. And I was hurt and upset and sad. And I remember like freezing. And I remember thinking to myself, I have a choice here. I can keep walking, ignore him, or I could make a difference and go to him and actually possibility enlighten, help him understand what the impact that just had on me. And maybe he won't do that kind of thing to people in the future. So what I did was I paused. I took a breath. I felt the ground underneath me. And even though I was shaking, I was checking my resources. And I was like, okay, you know what? I really want to go over there. And this matters to me. And as I'm walking over there, I was imagining having empathy for him, which is the next one, empathy. I'm sure he was just recreating what he's done in our culture. And I imagine that he doesn't understand that this was hurtful. And also for myself, like that didn't hurt. And that hurt. And I'm like, I could feel myself shaking. And I'm like, this is significant to me. So P is permission. So I got over to the guy. And by the time I got close to him, he was like, "Oh no, I'm sorry, ma'am, I'm sorry." It was almost like he knew what he had done just by me even walking over there, right? So I go over there and he's just like, I'm sorry. And then I said, "Hi, my name's Hazel-Grace. What's your name?" And he was just like, no, I'm sorry. I was like, "What's your name?" And he told me his name. And I said, "Are you open to hearing what that was like for me?" And he just still kept like wanting me to go away. And I asked again, the permission was, "Are you open to hearing what that was like for me?" And he said yes. And I could see his body relax and him go into more a receptive mode. And then the A stands for acknowledge. And so I said, "When you yelled sweet tits," that's the acknowledge step. And then the impact on me is I felt afraid. My stomach clenched. I started shaking, and it hurt a lot. And he really was taking it in. And in this particular case, I didn't go to restore integrity, which we'll get to that later, because it didn't feel necessary to me in that moment. Him getting the impact is what I was wanting. But what was even cooler is later, like 30 minutes later, I was walking by kind of where he was, and he was over talking to his friend, and I overheard him, and he was like, dude, I totally messed up. I like say sweet tits to this girl and like hurt her feelings, and like I feel so bad. And like by him retelling that story really had me feel like that was worth it. That it's possible that him and maybe his friend would consider in the future of like not saying something that would cause hurt and pain. So that's the kind of like quick story that captures the whole process in one go.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. And I really want to applaud you in that moment for deciding to confront him when, you know, so often for folks who are socialized as women, it's like, it's just easier to not. It's just easier to like seek safety, to brush it off. And yet that is how, you know, men often, or just whoever is doing something wrong, you know, continues to do it.
Yeah.
And to your point, like if we don't bring things up, then they will never change. But bringing it up is going to have at least a possibility of change.
It is a possibility. And I acknowledge the incredible amount of emotional labor that it took, and courage. And when I say courage, it's because I was afraid. I didn't know how he was going to react.
No.
Right. I was all by myself out there in this field. There was nobody around. So it took labor. It took effort. And in this case, it was worth it. And it took an incredible amount of resources. Like I have enough resources within myself that I was capable in that moment of going towards him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, great. So let's dive back in. We did the resourcing. Now I'm going to go to empathy. And we break empathy into two different parts. And empathy is, again, this is all exploration before you get to the conversation. So empathy is, how can I take up space to have empathy for myself, which is really self-compassion. And also, can I be curious about what might have been going on for the other? And I call this anticipatory understanding. And it's anticipatory because we're not actually in the conversation, but it's like, can I be curious about maybe what was going on for them? The reason why it's important to have self-compassion is, well, one, later in the conversation, you're going to want to share impact. And so it's good for you to articulate and kind of notice what the impact was on you. But what I've also found is that a lot of people skip this step. And they don't actually let themselves say, that didn't feel good. They don't, maybe they're an endurer, or like they don't want to say it's a big deal, or, you know, they want to be tough, or they don't want to be sound like a victim, or all those things. But this is actually really important for you to be in contact with what was the impact on you? What was that like for you? And one way that I like to kind of have people imagine that is, if they have a hard time doing that for themselves, imagining a friend told them what happened, and what would you say to them from your heart? Like, oh, wow, that makes sense that you feel like that. Or like, oh, wow, that really sucks. I'm sorry that happened to you. Right. So that's what you would do with yourself. And then with the other is being curious about the other. And a story I had recently with my partner, who seems like our biggest fights have been around how we manage our coolers, our ice chests when we travel. We've gotten better now, but they were like some different opinions about it. And we got home from a trip, and he said, I'm really frustrated that there's eggshells at the bottom of the cooler. And I paused and I took a breath, and I thought to myself, I wonder when last time he ate food. I wonder how much sleep he got. I wonder, it's really hot out, and I wonder if he actually doesn't remember all the things that happened when we were camping this last week. So I was like, really like, what might have been going on for him such that he would be so frustrated about this. And also I wonder if he didn't remember that he was the one that had the eggshells on top of the cooler, la 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 la. So I'm just like, what might have been going on for him? So that's the empathy for other. And those two, resourcing and empathy, are going to support you so that when you get to the permission step, which is the step that you're going to ask someone like, hey, will you engage in this conversation with me? If you get to that permission step and there's still a lot of like anger or tension or intensity, you may or may not enroll the other person in wanting to have that conversation with you, or they might already be on the defense, right? So it's again, there's no like level of like, now I'm ready to go to the permission step. You go to the permission step when you feel ready to go to the permission step. And the reason why the permission step is so important, among many other things, is, and maybe this is something that you've experienced before, where all of a sudden you're in a conversation and you didn't know or didn't realize you were going to be in a clearing conversation or a processing conversation, or you didn't know what the point of the conversation, and you're like in it and you're a little caught off guard or some version of that. And so what we want to do is we want to set both people up for success. We want both people to feel as resource and ready and informed consent, and having clear parameters of like, what is the intention of this conversation. So the permission step, I have a couple of like steps within the permission step, but one of them is headlining it like, hey, I'd like to have a conversation with you about the text message that you sent me, which was very specific and objective. And you don't want to put things in there like subjectives or interpretations or assumptions or blaming things. Like, I want to talk about your problematic text you sent me, right? Again, that's gonna set someone off. That's not what we're doing here. We're trying to get enrollment and like buy-in here. So what do you want to talk about? And what is the desired outcome? And this is the one that I love. The desired outcome. The desired outcome is, if we were to have this conversation, what is the gift? What's the best possible thing that can come from us having this conversation? So it could be like a desire is to feel more connected. A desire is to feel more of a sense of trust. It could be like to problem solve something. It could be so that you understand me more, or that I can feel heard, or that we can feel heard, right? So that's the desired outcome, getting on the same page. So, hey, I'd like to have a conversation with you about the text message that you sent me. It's in service of us getting on, making sure that we're in alignment with agreements that we have. And then you also, this is where the charge scale comes in, because you would say, and it's a level 4 or level 7 on the charge scale. And the reason why I love this is that information is going to be useful for them to determine whether they feel resourced enough to have that conversation either now or later, or what they might need in order to feel safe enough or ready to have that conversation. And then you'd say, I feel level 5. Are you open to that conversation? And then you negotiate to find a time or when you want to have that conversation. So that's the permission step.
Awesome. So all of that is just like setting the stage for the conversation. And it sounds like this could happen in the moment, like when you're at the festival, or it could kind of happen in the background. Maybe you're like, oh, that thing they said yesterday is rubbing me the wrong way, and I didn't know why, but now I've been asking myself, like, how am I feeling about it? And and to go back to the empathy, it makes so much sense why we do want to really get curious on what is the impact on me, so that we don't just say like, well, that was shitty that you did, or like we don't overly index on the behavior, and more of like, this is how it impacted me. And I would imagine anyone we're in intimate relationship with, even if it's just friends, don't want us to feel bad. And so while they may not have had ill intent, it's like when we can really clearly articulate the impact, they're probably going to deeply care about that and want to seek some kind of resolution where, you don't feel that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And so by taking the time to really feel into what is the impact, assuming that the people in your life care about you, like you just said, revealing like this hurt and putting the attention on the impact, as opposed to, like you said, like blaming or focusing on their behavior, right? It actually just creates more intimacy, which is the whole point of all of this. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so if, let's say, like, I bring something up and I say, hey, it's a 5 for me, but it's actually much higher for that other person, then, do we kind of need to wait until they're a little more resourced, or till we're kind of both at a place where we can actually be resourced enough to have that conversation?
Yeah. And, what could be really cool, there's a couple of cool things that can happen here. One is, if you know your partner well, you could also like guess how intense you think it might be for them. Like, I think it's a level 4 for me. It might be a level 7 for you. That may or may not be useful. When the person receives that information, it's their job to determine and to assess, do I have the spaciousness? Do I feel prepared? Again, have I slept? Am I sober? Have I eaten? Like, to be able to engage in a level of conversation. Like, so for example, my partner was driving. I said, hey, I've got something. It's a 1. This is how quick our conversations go. I've got something. It's a level 1. Are you open to it? Right. It's like super fast. Right. So there's a lot of steps and there's a lot of things into this, but when you practice it enough and enough, it just becomes like your way of being. And that's the other thing I love about teaching this stuff, is I'm not like teaching from a book. This is actually how I live my life. And I have an epic relationship. So we're driving the car. Hey, I've got a 1. Yeah, I'm available. He can drive and hear a 1, and we can have that conversation. But let's say it was a level 9. He might actually need a day, or he might actually want to bring in a therapist, or he might actually need some time to process and to say, I don't feel like I have the capacity for a 9. And then we would have to negotiate and make a plan of when we would come back to that conversation, which is actually really important. If someone says, hey, can we have this conversation? And they say, no, not right now. It's really important to, especially for the anxious leaning folks, to have set a day or a time, at least to have a check back in. So let's say, like, can we give it 24 hours and let's check back in, or, so it's just important to get really clear. If you're going to make a plan, follow through on the plan, because it takes vulnerability and courage and risk to ask someone to have a clearing conversation, right? So just knowing that there's vulnerability in even asking for it. Yeah. Did that answer your question? That's a great question.
It did. And I have 2 more questions, one of which I definitely already know the answer to, but the first one is, can you have a clearing conversation over text, or should it happen in person or other?
Great question. I have a pretty strict rule that emotional processing does not happen over text or email or anything like that. There's just too much missing information, intonations. Yeah, I don't ever recommend that. I will say my only like caveat to that is, like, if it's like emotional, like, I love you, I appreciate you, those are great, but not like emotional processing, challenging things. So yeah, no texting processing is my recommendation.
Yep. It's funny. My most recent relationship that ended, the beginning of the end was because they basically sent a massive dump of something like this, and they were like, oh, well, it's helpful for me to write through it. And I was like, I cannot receive it that way. And you cannot repair that way. And you cannot interpret it from an empathetic way that way. And your nervous system cannot be regulated that way. So just like, don't do it, guys. Don't do it.
Don't do it. Don't do it. It's pretty rare for me to tell people what to do. And this might be a place of like, I want to tell you to just not do it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just one that it's like, you're going to avoid so much trouble. And yeah, but related, the second question is about asking for the permission. Can that be over text? Should that be in person? If you know that someone's really stressed, like how do you discern, like, if you know it's going to be a 9 and they're driving a car, maybe do you decide to wait? So how do you even discern how to ask for permission in that modality?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I mean, my answer is going to be, I think it's always going to be best if it can be in person. And that may not always happen if people are long distance or traveling. Second best would be over the phone with voice. And then the third would be some version of writing. And it really just depends on the relationship. It depends on their capacity. It depends on their agreements. It depends on how intense is the thing, right? Like if we had an agreement, don't ever ask permission to have a clearing conversation over text, and then you do that, that would not be good, right? So it feels like there's too many variables, but I could see where a text to ask for a clearing conversation could work. Yeah. Or even getting permission over text, like, hey, well, I don't know. I was gonna say, can ask permission to ask permission to no,
it's complicated.
Complicated. Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm hearing that there ideally is some broader conversations in the relationship about communication styles, including like, hey, when I do need to bring something up, like let's say during the day I want to just raise it to you so we can talk about it in the evening. Can I text or should I just wait? And so having maybe some norms within a relationship.
Absolutely. I love that. That sounds really great.
Awesome.
Great. So that is the REP. So resourcing, empathy, and permission. So we've done the preparation, and then we've gotten to a yes, and we move into the clearing the air conversation. And the first letter in air is A for acknowledge. And acknowledge is, let's get on the same page. Let's acknowledge about what happened, and what I like to call that is shared reality. Let's make sure we have the same reality of what happened before we talk about impact. And this is actually probably one of the most important steps, because if you are not on the same page, if you're talking about this incident and they're talking about that incident, but you think you're talking about the same thing, it's just going to be a goat rodeo. It's not going to go well. And so acknowledge. So really in more simple things, what we're looking for is what did or did not happen, and what can we agree on what happened. There's a really funny story by Douglas Adams, who's an author in England, and he was at a train station and he bought a coffee, 8 package of cookies, and a newspaper. And he went over and sat down waiting for his train. And the businessman was sitting across from him. And he looks, and all of a sudden the businessman reaches over, grabs a package of cookies, and starts opening it and eats one of the cookies. And Douglas Adams is just like, what? And then so Douglas Adams doesn't say anything and chooses to eat one of his cookies. So there's 6 cookies now. And then the businessman eats another cookie, and Douglas eats another cookie. And this keeps going until all 8 cookies are done, right? And then his train arrives, and Douglas is like, okay. And they still don't say anything. And he picks up his coffee and his newspaper, and there underneath his newspaper is his package of cookies that he bought.
Oh my God.
So imagine these two people who both are experiencing that guy is eating my cookies. Both of them experienced that, even though that wasn't actually the truth or the reality. So if they were going to have a debate or a conversation about what happened, of like, you stole my cookies, no, you stole my cookies, they're not on the same reality. Right. So I think that story is really funny. Thank you, Douglas Adams, for that story. So acknowledging is just saying, hey, so in my memory, like this happened, a conflict that Nico and I had. I was we were camping and I was taking our bikes off the bike rack, and he came over and he said, hey, can you push the lock through here and pull it out and I can help you? And I just got really triggered in that moment because because what was happening in my story is if I was making up the story that he was taking it over, he didn't think I could do it on my own. I was like doing it on my own, and it just kind of threw me off. And so later, when we had to process the conversation, we're like, okay, so what I remember happening is you came out back door, I was there, you said this. And he was like, actually, I remember saying this. And I was like, oh yeah, you're right. That is actually what you said. So then we got to like a shared reality of what happened. And it's not important that you get every single detail exactly right. It's just getting on the same page about the pertinent facts of what matters. And yeah, and I'll say if you can't get to shared reality, if you can't acknowledge this same kind of content, this is a point where you might need to get help, like support, like an outside person. You might also have to do the AIR process independent, like from your reality and from their reality. And I will say that this is incredibly advanced, incredibly nuanced. It is not easy. And I don't have any other solution other than both people getting to experience it. But really, in order to do that, what you'd have to do is, I would say, okay, I'm willing to hear your story and your impact first, which means I'm going to have to suspend my reality and listen fully in getting their reality. And then they would have to do the same thing, which takes, again, a lot of capacity to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. That sounds hard.
Yep. That's hard. That's hard. And it's also useful to know that there was a study done after 9/11, and what they found is 1 year after the incident, that the details changed of what people remembered changed 50% from what it was.
Yep.
But they thought it was 100% accurate.
Yep.
So just knowing over time, our memory changes. And so for us to be, especially if it's from a while ago, so for us to be careful about what we think we absolutely remember is taking it with a grain of salt. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it seems like the purpose of, I hear you basically saying, let's get clear on the like observable facts or the observable things that happened. You said this, I did that, and then this happened, and trying to get as concrete as possible, which of course we're never going to remember all the details, so that we can have a conversation about impact that's informed by what happened instead of getting nebulously lost in emotions. And that, it's like, maybe we don't need to fully see eye to eye on the exact thing that happened, but it can help us have greater empathy for impact. And like, so maybe it's okay if we're like, I don't think I said that, but it sounds like whatever I said really hurt you, it's like that's the ultimately outcome, even if, complete 100% shared reality isn't achievable.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So if I said to my partner, I don't remember saying that, and I believe you that you have the memory that I said that, and I'm willing to get your world and really get, like, if you heard me say that, that makes sense that you feel hurt. And that is like believing their reality, even if I don't remember that me saying that exact thing. Yeah. And that's, and again, in simpler things, it's like what happened or what didn't happen. What did we say? What did we not say? And then if I can just add like another fun, like nuanced layer here, which was, for example, with Nico, I said, I remember I said this thing and I saw your eyes get big and your shoulders went back. When I saw that, I interpreted you as feeling mad. And he's like, oh, got it. You interpreted me as feeling mad. When that happened, I actually remember feeling surprised. So we have shared reality that this thing happened. His eyes got big, his shoulders went back. I interpreted it as mad, and he experienced it as surprised. So that does encompass the acknowledge. So now that we have the acknowledgement of how we interpreted it, because we owned our experience, right? I didn't say, and then you were mad. I said, I saw this thing happen and I interpreted it as mad. And so that's the kind of more granular, nuanced version of acknowledge.
Yeah. Right before you started saying that, I was going to ask, do we acknowledge things like emotions and tones, and like, as far as like essentially our interpretations of like, oh, well, you raised your voice, but it sounds like the skillful acknowledgement is to name that and name the story. So, one thing I teach my clients is to say, the story I told myself was, because it helps you name. You're like, yeah, you raised your voice. So the story I told myself was that you were really mad at me and da 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 da.
Yeah. It is. And this is something I'm still kind of working out, because in the I impact, that is actually one of the things we get to say. And the impact was the story I made up is this. And I'm finding that sometimes it's actually useful to, in the acknowledge step, to name some of those things. So let's go ahead and slide right into the impact. So the impact is, okay, this thing happened. Both of us were impacted. And you take turns on who's going to share first. And ideally, the one who felt more hurt is the one who gets to share first. If both people felt hurt, then you're just going to have to negotiate and choose who's going to share first. And I would say the more important thing is that the person who's going to listen first is the person who feels the most resourced. So in a case where I am the one who felt the most hurt, but I can see that my partner is not in a receptive place to listen, that I might have more capacity and resources to say, you know what, I think it's actually going to feel safer for me to hear your impact first. So it's, ideally the person who feels the most hurt shares first. And really who should be the one to listen is the one who has the most grounded resource capacity in that moment. Great. So impact, sharing impact. There's multiple ways that we can be impacted by anything at any time. Some of them include body sensations. So like earlier, I said my stomach clenched. I felt my body shaking. Emotions, sad, mad, angry. Story creations. The story I made up is that you thought I didn't know how to do it on my own. That's the story I made up. It's not based in reality or truth, but as the story that I made up. So loss could be loss of money, opportunity, reputation. So these are all the different ways that we can be impacted. And so when you share your impact, then what you would say is, when this thing happened and this thing happened, you've already agreed upon on the acknowledge step. So you've already done that. So like when you said, push that lock through here, the impact on me was, and then I say the impact, and then my partner paraphrases it and they say, so when I said, pull the lock here, you felt confused, you felt like you made up the story that I was telling you what to do, and you felt flustered. Did I get that right? And that step is so important. This is what I heard you say. Did I get that right? And you keep doing that over and over and over until the person says, you got it. Yeah. You got it. Great. And you keep doing that. And as the speaker, you really want to speak in small enough chunks so that your person can actually paraphrase it back. And as the listener, almost imagining like listening as if your ears are located on your heart, because the impact step of this whole thing is really the it's the healing, it's the tenderest, it's the heart space of the repair process of like really being in your empathy, activating your empathy neurons and like really getting what it's like for the other person. And the magic words that I would encourage you to use, if it feels true for you, is after you've heard them, is you can offer, that makes sense. That makes sense that you feel that way.
Yeah.
I really hear you. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. It takes courage to share, and really thanking the other person for listening.
Mm-hmm.
And while you're, another really good practice is, if I were to say, and the impact on me is I was sad, confused, and hurt, and then they tried to paraphrase it back and they didn't get it quite right, take a breath, that's okay, thank them for trying, and then saying, most of that was great, and what felt missing for me was this. Because if you're criticizing or getting mad at someone for not paraphrasing it right, again, you're just adding more tension to the process. So the impact is, when this thing happened, the impact on me was this. What I'm hearing you say is, did I get that right? Until you go back and forth until both of you feel heard.
Beautiful. Yeah. And so I really hear that it's using I statements to talk about the thing that happened, I felt, I thought, story that my mind created, and really keeping it, instead of even, naming what they did, but being like, and you were a jerk, or like a label. And
Yeah.
wow, the power of having someone paraphrase so that our system can digest, like, is that true? Because it's also an opportunity for us to refine and say, oh, well, actually, like, it's not that you didn't get it right. It's maybe that I didn't fully express it right, or the way you interpreted it. So let me offer up another layer to that. And so then, like, you're actually deeply freaking held and seen. Wow.
Yes, totally.
Mm.
Yeah, and also what I love about this process is, I didn't say this earlier about resourcing. Resourcing is the first step that we do, but it's also we do throughout every single step. We are resourcing throughout the whole process. And what's cool is each step can be resourcing, right? So if you're getting to empathy, that can be resourcing. If you get to permission, just to even know that someone's willing to have the conversation, or someone's willing to ask it in such a clear, kind way, can be resourcing. Acknowledge, for someone to say, you know what, I acknowledge we had an agreement and I didn't do that. I acknowledge that I take responsibility that I didn't do that, right? That can be resourcing. Impact, being heard, can be incredibly healing and resourcing. And you might not even need to get to the letter R, which you may or may not. But that's why the R is there in case you do need it, which is restore integrity. So we'll go right into restore integrity. So restore integrity is it's like the icing on the cake. It's the actions that really support restoring that trust and that connection. And these are things that you can do. And there's a menu. I have a menu. There's 4 different options. And depending on each conflict or upset will depend on whether you need any of them, all of them, some of them. And also with restore integrity, it might take time, and it might take like doing something and they realize, actually, I need a little bit more, or actually, this is the thing that I'm still needing. Like we had my partner and I, a couple of years ago, the biggest rupture we ever had, it was a 3-month process for me to really feel like trust was restored. And we kept doing multiple things that incrementally was like, okay, I'm trusting. So for the person who felt the break in trust or connection, they're the ones to determine when the integrity is restored. It's up to their pacing. And for the person who, let's say, caused the hurt, they may be showing up in trustworthy behavior, before the other person says, okay, I trust you now. So that's just one thing to consider. Like, just because you did check something off the restore menu list doesn't mean like that, like trust is going to be restored. It may take time and consistency, right? Okay, so what are the 4 restore entirety? One of them is remorse. And this one's probably like, most of us know it's an apology. I made a mistake. I was wrong for doing that. I feel regret. I really apologize. And what's useful in this step is really knowing what the language is for the other person. Like what really resonates for the other person that also feels in your authentic truth. So some version of an apology of like, wow, I really wish I hadn't have done that, or I wish I would have done it better. And I'm sorry that happened, right? So that's remorse. The second one is restorative actions. And this would be some act, some doing. The most amazing one is when my dad and I have healed, and he's my best buddy. And growing up, he used corporal punishment and yelling, and it was pretty traumatic for me. And later in life, when I was doing my healing work and we did our healing work, the day after he acknowledged what he did, he called me and said, I can't go back and change what happened, but I'd like to pay for your therapy for the rest of your life. Whew, right?
Wow. Yep.
Yeah. And what's so cool about that restorative action is I didn't have to come up with it. I didn't have to be the one to do the labor to think of something. I've had the experience where such a good intention question where someone's like, what can I do to make it up for you? Or what can I do to make this right? Which beautiful intention, but how it lands on me is like, all right, I'm hurt. Now I have to come up with something. I have to make something up. I have to create something. So even though restorative action is bi-directional, meaning someone could offer it or I could make the request, it's a really great idea for you to make some offers or make some suggestions and say, like, I could, give you a massage. I could call your friend on your behalf and let them know what I did. I could, no contact for a month with you. I could, what could I, like, these are some things that I could do. Would any of these work for you? So I really like the idea of someone coming to the table with an offer, even if the offer isn't wanted, but it's like you've put in some legwork into it. Yeah. Okay. The next R is rewrite. And the rewrite is, are there any agreements that we need to rewrite? Like, that really hurt that you sent that emotional processing text. I would like to create an agreement with you that we don't do any emotional processing. Do you agree to that? So like writing or rewriting agreements. The other one that I think is really cool is rewriting our stories. So for example, when my partner came to rescue me on a motorcycle, my motorcycle broke down, and when he came, he was like pretty huffy. And I was like, because I had rescued him 3 times that year when his motorcycle broke down. And I was like excited every time. So it's like, I was excited for him to be excited to come rescue me. And he wasn't very excited. But I found out later why, because like what he had to deal with to come get me was like, I was like, I get it. But anyway, I made up the story in that moment of like, oh, my partner doesn't care about me as much as I care about him. Or he's not excited to be in service to me. And once I found out everything, I was like, okay, etch a sketch, erase that story. What's actually more true is my partner really, really cares for me and shows up a lot for me in service and loves being in service to me. So rewrite our stories is one. And then the last one, they're all kind of my favorite, but I actually really love redo. Redo is, now that we know what we know, if we could go back in time, if we could rewind, what would both of us have done or said differently so that Yeah, so that it works better for us. And what I really love about this, if we want to get geeky about our neuroscience brain, there's a part of our brain when we visualize and when we embody and we feel, the brain doesn't always know the distinction between real life and our visualization. And so when we can imagine or even reenact what we would say or do and really have it like be embodied, it creates those neural pathways so that when something like that happens in the future, we already have like, our brain already has an experience of what would have been even better for both of us in that case. So that's redo. So you have restore integrity includes remorse, restorative actions, rewrite our stories or our agreements, and then redo.
I love that. And I can imagine that for some, situations, you might need all of those. You might need a combo platter.
Yes, you might need a combo platter, and or you might need to do them multiple times.
Yeah. Yeah. To your point, like, oh my gosh, I feel like it's like a trope in the media of like, someone doing, sorry, what was the second R?
Restorative actions.
Restorative action. Yeah. Or like they apologize and like, well, I got you flowers and I took the kids to and they're like, why isn't it fixed yet? And so to your point of like, no, actually the person who had the big hurt gets to decide. And it's not just a one and done. You don't get to just be like, okay, well, I did this nice thing for you. And so now, and it makes sense why you might have to go through these mini cycles again of like, okay, let's check back in. How are we feeling? And yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's a lot.
Yeah, it is kind of a lot.
I think if people even retain 10% of this, I suspect their relationships will improve. But yeah, so okay. Yeah. And I want to like double click on, the emphasis that resourcing happens throughout. This isn't a linear process. This doesn't have to happen all in one go. And that if we do these on small things, it's probably going to get a lot easier to do them on big.
Oh, yeah. And I really encourage folks to clear the ones, twos, and threes. Because when you don't clear the small things, they become 5, 6, 7, and 8. And an 8 to clear an 8 is going to be way harder than clear 2. And then it builds and there's resentment. And so, yeah, again, I can't emphasize that enough. Practice this on the small little things to get better at, so that when you get to the bigger things, you've got kind of like more practice. And, I teach classes on this. I work with folks one-on-one. So this was a fire hose, a lot of content in here. And so if you want to deepen in that, that's, definitely a possibility.
Yeah. Yeah. I went to your workshop in San Francisco and I highly recommend, because having a visual is helpful, only hearing it is challenges, or, we learn through multiple ways, and being able to practice it with other people is super awesome.
Yeah. I'm curious if you want to share your experience from the workshop or anything that stood out for you.
Yeah. I think, I really appreciated how you started asking people like, what are some of their beliefs around conflict? And it helped me feel really, it helped it feel very normal that part of me wants to avoid conflict. And, it's like, I grew up in a household where we didn't talk about these things. And then all of a sudden, like there was a big rupture and maybe a relationship ended. So for me, it's like, oh no, conflict means very bad, and yet, of course, when you do actually work on these things early and often, it doesn't have to mean that. So I will say in preparation for this interview, I've been analyzing my past relationships and being like, where did we go wrong? And be like, we didn't get shared reality, and thus this couldn't happen, and thus this couldn't happen, and be like, yes, this happened. And so really seeing how the lack of using this framework was so detrimental. And, I'm not like, I don't think that I'm meant to be with those humans, but I do think, especially in an early relationship, like your first major conflict can either strengthen or it can cause it to end. And if both people have the skills, have the capacity, or at least have the desire, then it doesn't necessarily have to.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Thanks for that callback to hear that. Talking about the beliefs, or what did you learn growing up, that's a really great, if you're in a relationship, a significant relationship of any kind right now, actually having a conversation. What did you learn about conflict growing up? What was the environment? What did you learn? Because that's really useful information to know how we grew up with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, as a somatic practitioner, trauma is definitely on my front and center. And so for folks who've experienced major trauma, especially relational trauma, attachment wounds, like, are there any adjustments for this process so that it's really going to be fruitful and not, re-traumatizing or kind of more challenging than it needs to be, since it's probably already pretty sensitive?
Yeah. Well, I would say that if tracking your nervous system when you're having these repair conversations, and if you're noticing that you're unable to have some of these clearing, repairing conversations in a way that has you feel some version of you staying connected to your body, then it might be a good time to get support. And that support could look like a different environment. Is it being outside? Is it being with a friend? Is it with a coach or a therapist or someone that, can offer more resourcing for you? And yeah, it's a really great thing that you bring up. And I just finished my first 56-page workbook, which I'm very excited about. And I wrote in there, future iterations will include more information on identity, intersectionality, power dynamics, trauma, because all of those things will affect and impact our ability to use the repair process in a way. And so, yeah, I mean, I'd even say if you are someone who is in some version of a up power position, whether it's your race or your gender or your role at work, if you're in an up power position, going into these repair conversations with the awareness that this might be a really vulnerable, scary, uncomfortable position, or if you're working with someone who is more traumatized, like bringing in even more softness and compassion, and like how much resource can you embody to support and knowing that this person has a lot of trauma. Which is actually my partner, Nico, and we're actually teaching this class together, and we're taking couples on outdoor adventures using this process, which is really fun and exciting. And I wish he was here to talk about it, but I have way more trauma than he has. And so he's beautifully shown up in our relationship, having remembering and understanding the intensity of trauma that I experienced, and having so much grace and so much spaciousness and so much gentleness for that, which is extraordinary that he can continue to have that awareness and spaciousness because he didn't grow up in the trauma. So it's or maybe it is because he didn't grow up in trauma, he has the spaciousness, but both are incredible. But those are some things to consider, especially if you're interacting with someone who has trauma.
Yeah, thank you. And so in a perfect world, someone's going to learn this and just use this process. But as more likely, they're going to take baby steps and incorporate pieces. And so I'm curious if there's any kind of like red flags as far as like, here's the most common mistakes that people make when trying to repair or during conflict, that even if you can't do this full process just yet, at least try to step away from some of these default things that many of us do during conflict and repair. What would those be?
Yeah. If you can only do two, if there's only two things that you can practice, it's paraphrase. So what I heard you say is, did I get that right? And almost do that to the point where it is like nauseum. Like, to the point where you are just like every sentence if you need to. And that one in and of itself can prevent or help or heal so many relationships. I just can't. If I was on Oprah and I had one thing to say, that's what I would say, is paraphrase. The other one is the permission and like really getting context. Like, I want to have this conversation. Are you open to it? And really setting the stage so that both people have a chance to really, feel heard and understood. So permission, really getting permission, and paraphrasing throughout your whole relationship. And I recommend the paraphrasing even when things are going well. You can practice paraphrasing, right? Like, oh, what I think I heard you say is that you really appreciate that I took out the trash. Did I get that right? Yes. And like have fun with it and be playful with it, so that it's like second nature when things get crunchy and hard.
Yeah, it's actually just a mastery level communication skill. And, like many of us do it because we're coaches or practitioners, but, people who aren't a client will be like, wow, I feel so seen and heard by you. Thank you so much. And I'm like, you are very welcome. And so like, yeah, just if you're like, how's your day, honey? And they tell you, and you do that instead of just going on to like, great, so what should we have for dinner? Those are two very different feelings. And that's going to be a very different tone for your evening.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it is just such a fast way to create intimacy, is have the other person feel heard, seen, and understood. And paraphrasing is the like, it almost feels like cheating. Like, it almost feels like too simple.
You're like, well, you just said this.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But it works.
It works. It works.
Yeah. And any things that we should definitely avoid. I know you already named, like, don't have these conversations over text or email. Just don't.
Don't have these conversations when you are altered. And altered can look like not enough sleep. It can look like substances. It can look like hangry. Yeah. And being super, super rigorous with owning your experience when you're speaking. So speaking from the authority that you have over your own experience, which when you're doing that, what you're not doing is you're not blaming, you're not assuming, you're not projecting, you're not putting your stuff on them. You're just radically saying, this is my experience. Because that's where people get into a lot of trouble, is they have assumptions. They're not checking their assumptions. They'll, like earlier, like, well, I saw your eyes, you were definitely mad. That is not owning your experience. That's putting an assumption overlaying on somebody else. And then they have to either defend or go along with, or some version of like something, right? So owning your experience avoids all that stuff that we don't want.
Yeah. And if we're in defensive mode, it's really hard to actually have empathy for the other person. So it's like it's not going to go well.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that you can't be in empathy and be defensive at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's true.
It reminds me of someone said, like, it's scientifically impossible to skip and be mad. But I think it's scientifically impossible to be super defensive and empathetic at the same time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, those two don't go well.
Yeah, so you can add skipping to your resource list.
Oh, yes. just start skipping, and then eventually you'll have to get happy.
You have to. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think of curiosity and empathy as like two sides of the same coin, or two opposite sides, whatever that saying is. And so it's like, how do you facilitate curiosity, which is why you have that empathy stage. And maybe even like using the words like, I'm curious about what that was like for you. I'm curious, how did that make you feel? I'm curious, how are you feeling now? And like centering that instead of, like if those defensive modes want to come out, like, catch it, like replace it with curiosity and empathy.
Yeah. Curiosity is to actually be in the spirit of curiosity because I think a lot of people will use the word curious, I'm curious, when they're actually not.
So
And I'm like,
true.
you don't seem curious. You seem like you have an agenda or you have an opinion or you have a view on this thing, but you're saying the word curious, but I don't actually feel your embodiment of curiosity, because to be in the spirit of curiosity, what it says is, I don't actually know. I don't know what is the truth, but I am curious. Is it this or this or this? So that's something I didn't say earlier, but this is just a tool. The repair process is a tool, and any tool can be used to actually cause harm or to help. And the way that it's going to help is when you are being congruent with the words that you're saying and your way of being. So your tone, your body language. So just going through and saying all the right things is not going to get you there if it's not really coming from this like genuine place in your embodiment.
Yeah. Thank you so much for saying that. And I have experienced that with folks saying I'm curious. So thank you. And it reminds me how I think one of the most common critiques of nonviolent communication, which has its similarities, is that people can use it to be rather bypassing or gaslighting or controlling, but they're using this formula. So it's hard to kind of challenge them, or to I don't know, have a real authentic conversation, because it's sort of like the formula is like the armor in a way. Yeah.
Yeah, I it feels really empowering and weird to say that I'm aware that this tool could be used to be weaponized, and that it can be used to manipulate. Like, it's because that's true about anything, right? But to say it out loud and to be aware of that, and the way that it can be used to manipulate is if someone's being out of integrity or out of alignment or out of congruency with their intention and what they're saying, and how they're relating with this tool. But I'm really curious, because this is still fresh, hot off the press, right? This is like only 1 year old, not even 1 year old process. But I am really curious at some point to hear people's stories of if they ever had the experience where they were feeling like this process was being used in a way that was manipulative in some way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, absolutely. Any tool can be used for any purpose. But
Yep.
I feel your intent behind this. And, I think bringing it back to the body of like, how is this landing for me? Does it feel gross the way someone is communicating? And does it feel like this is manipulative? Like, trust your body, trust your gut. And, that's impact, share that impact. And to your point of like, you can use this process, but it may not actually result in repair. Not all conflict, not all rupture can be repaired. And sometimes we need to say, like, I actually don't want a relationship with you. And
Yeah.
even when you try to repair, that could be the outcome. And often I think that's for better, because if there's not alignment, then,
Yeah.
best to go separate ways.
Yeah, totally. Going separate ways is totally an option. And I noticed myself wanting to actually tell you what I said when someone says I'm curious, but I didn't sense, I like, my body's like, I don't feel like you're curious. So I have said this before, and it's edgy to say, but I say, when I hear you say I'm curious, I notice that my body kind of like contracts, and I get a little nervous, and there's a part of me that doesn't feel your genuine sense of curiosity. And I'm wondering what's that like to hear, or I'm wondering if you can share your experience when you were saying I'm curious.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel curious how that unfolded, but maybe. And,
Yeah, go ahead.
well, I'll just say, from my experience working with folks who have complex trauma, who've maybe been in relationships with folks who've been rather avoidant, they've had situations where it felt like oh, my trauma is causing all of this, all of these sensations, all of these emotions. And yet actually their body was really accurately picking up on some bullshit. And so even if you have trauma, if you don't feel alignment, trust that. And, you know, whether it is intentional manipulation or someone who is just, you know, not trying to like have a great processing conversation that's authentic and real and vulnerable, like I really want to tell people to like trust your body and the sensations that it's telling you. And you, like they might say, no, I am. And it's like, but if you really feel in your body, they're not listening with curiosity. Like they have their side, like, you know, trust that.
Yeah. 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 Totally. Yeah. And that's again why it's so powerful to own your experience. Because if I say, when I hear you say that, the impact on my body is this, they can't argue that that's my experience. That is my truth. That is my experience. And having reverence for that wisdom is really important.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, we covered a lot of ground. Is there anything else you want to add?
I don't think I have anything to add. I just want to really relay the potential and the possibility of such rich connection and intimacy, and even really great sexuality when you are in a relationship where you are clearing stuff on a regular basis. And it's just so, it's like so worth it. It's so juicy and so worth it to lean into the uncomfortable to get really good at this, because eventually it doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to take a long time, and you can just like move through it. And that's what's possible. So I want to leave people with the possibility that this doesn't have to be hard and painful, and it can be fun, and you can move through things quickly to get to the yummy, juicy intimacy.
I love that. And I see the analogy of like, it's like when you just clean your house on a regular basis, which, hey, for some of us is hard, but then it just doesn't have to be as much work versus letting it build up and build up and build up. And then it's like, oh my God, this is exhausting.
Yeah, I love that analogy.
Yeah. Well, how can people work with you? How can they stay in touch if they want to learn more?
Yeah, my website, which is drhazelgrace.com. And I have events on there, virtual events, retreats, and I work one-on-one with folks. So that's how you can find out about me.
Do you work with couples or just individuals?
Both.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also do in-person work in Northern California. I'm also a sexological body worker. So I also do not only the communication stuff, but also sexual healing and education as well.
Awesome. And tell me a little bit about, is it Peaking Adventures?
Peaking Adventures. Yeah. I'm very excited about it, obviously. Peaking Adventures is my partner and I, Nico, we take couples on outdoor adventures. And when we're going on the outdoor adventures, it's likely that conflict will arise. And what a great opportunity for you to practice your repair skills. So the intention of the retreats are really to, like, on the court, really get connected to using the repair process and model in nature. And we go big tree climbing. We're going to be doing a wild hot springs this winter, and mountain biking and rafting. So stay tuned for all of that fun stuff.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, we've both been raft guides in our past, so it's really fun. Our different parts of our lives are all like congealing and coming together, and also our relationship is really beautiful to witness because we are a living example of this work. And so when you're on these adventures with us, you may see us find some ruptures, and you get to witness and be a part of and learn as in live, watching us navigate when we have little ouches, because we do. Because we're in a relationship.
And I imagine that's so soothing to see that, especially if you're a couple that maybe, you know, when the ouches happen, it feels really tender, but to see it just be resolved so quickly, it's like, oh, that's possible. Oh.
And it's not only about the quickness, it's also with so much care.
Yeah.
So much care. Oh my gosh. I'm like coming to teary eyes, feeling like the amount of care that we have. It's really great.
It's really special. And I want that for everyone. So I hope folks continue to learn from you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for this juicy conversation.
Yeah, thank you. This was so much fun. Appreciate you, Jaclyn.
Yay. Well, that was fun.